After she pays for my trip, I'll throw her in a nursing home. I heard this when my daughter-in-law forgot to hang up the phone. I panicked. I really paid for her one-way ticket, but when I decided to freeze her cards, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I was standing in my kitchen, holding the cordless phone that had been ringing moments before. Sandra had called asking about some minor detail regarding her upcoming European vacation, the one I'd been so excited to pay for. She'd painted it as a second honeymoon with my son Michael, something they desperately needed to reconnect after 15 years of marriage. I'd been thrilled to help. At 72, what else was my money for if not to make my family happy? The trip cost nearly $8,000. But seeing Sandra's face light up when I offered to pay had felt worth every penny. She'd hugged me so tightly that day, calling me the most generous mother-in-law in the world. But she hadn't hung up properly. The line stayed connected, and I heard her talking to someone else. Probably her sister Karen, based on the familiar tone. I swear, Karen, this old woman is so gullible. Sandra's voice crackled through the phone speaker. She just handed over $8,000 without even asking questions. Michael thinks I should wait until after the trip to bring up the nursing home thing, but honestly, I'm getting tired of pretending to care about her little stories and complaints. My hands started trembling. I should have hung up. I should have given them privacy. But something in Sandra's tone, a coldness I'd never heard before, kept me frozen in place. The best part is, she actually thinks we're grateful, Sandra continued with a laugh that made my stomach turn. Like, does she really believe we want to spend our vacation thinking about her? This trip is about getting away from all that responsibility. Once we get back, refreshed and tan, we'll start looking at those facilities. I already found 3 good options that take Medicaid. I sank into my kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Medicaid? I wasn't poor. I had savings, investments, a house that was paid off. Why would Sandra be looking at Medicaid facilities unless she planned to take everything I had first? The timing is perfect, Sandra went on. She's been having those senior moments lately, forgetting where she put her keys, repeating stories. It'll be easy to convince people she needs professional care. Michael's already on board. He's tired of her calling every day, wanting to come over for dinner, needing help with little things. He thinks it's time she had professional supervision. Those senior moments Sandra mentioned weren't signs of dementia. They were signs of loneliness. I forgot my keys because I was distracted thinking about how quiet my house was. I repeated stories because I was desperate for conversation, for someone to listen to me. And I called them every day because they were my only family since my husband Harold died 5 years ago. I figure we give it a month after we get back, Sandra continued. Let her feel useful one more time by helping us with some made-up emergency. Maybe tell her Michael needs surgery or something. Get her to sign over power of attorney for her own good. Then boom, she's in a nice facility where trained professionals can take better care of her than we ever could. The way she said trained professionals dripped with sarcasm. She wasn't thinking about my well-being. She was thinking about getting me out of her way while keeping access to my money. The house alone is worth $300,000, Sandra said, plus whatever she has in savings and investments. Michael thinks there's probably close to $500,000 total. Not bad for putting up with an old lady's neediness for a few more weeks. $500,000. They'd been calculating my worth like I was already dead. My chest felt tight, and for a moment I worried I might be having a heart attack. The stress, the shock, the complete betrayal of trust, it was overwhelming. But then I heard Sandra's voice again, and instead of pain, I felt something else rising in my chest, something harder and colder. I just have to keep playing the loving daughter-in-law role until after the trip, Sandra said. Smile when she shows me pictures of Michael as a baby for the 100th time. Pretend to care about her garden or her book club stories. Act grateful for her generous gift. God, if she only knew how much I resent having to perform gratitude for money that should have been ours years ago anyway. Money that should have been theirs? I'd worked for 40 years, saved every penny, sacrificed vacations and luxuries so I could leave something for Michael. But apparently, they thought they were entitled to it now, while I was still alive, still capable of making my own decisions. The best part is she'll probably thank us for putting her somewhere safe. Sandra laughed again. She's so desperate for approval. She'll convince herself we're doing it out of love. We won't have to feel guilty because she'll actually be grateful. That laugh, cruel and calculating, finally broke whatever spell had kept me listening. I hung up the phone with shaking hands and sat in my kitchen as the late afternoon sun slanted through the windows Harold had installed when we first bought this house 35 years ago. The silence felt different now. Before, it had been lonely. Now, it felt dangerous. I was alone in this house with no one to protect me from people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with an inconvenient old woman attached to it. I thought about all the times Sandra had complimented my cooking, asked for my recipes, brought her children over to visit their grandmother. Had it all been performance? Had every hug, every "I love you too, Mom Ruth," every grateful smile been calculated manipulation? My hands were still shaking as I reached for my purse and pulled out my checkbook. There, in my own handwriting, was the check I'd written just 2 days ago. $8,000 made out to Romantic European Getaways Travel Agency. I'd been so proud to give them this gift, so happy to see Sandra's excitement. The irony was bitter. I'd just paid for their celebration trip, the trip they'd take before putting me away like an unwanted piece of furniture. But as I sat there staring at that checkbook, something shifted inside me. The shock was fading, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Sandra and Michael thought they were so clever, planning my life without my knowledge, calculating my worth, deciding my future. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I might be 72, but I wasn't helpless. I wasn't confused. And I certainly wasn't going to go quietly into whatever facility they'd chosen for me. I walked to my bedroom and opened the old wooden jewelry box where Harold used to keep his important papers. In the back, behind my grandmother's pearls, was a business card that was 5 years old but still valid. Margaret Hayes, estate attorney. She'd handled Harold's will and had told me to call if I ever needed anything. It was time to make that call. Sandra wanted to play games with my money and my life? Fine. But she was about to learn that this particular game had rules she didn't know about, and I was much better at it than she could possibly imagine. The phone felt steadier in my hand this time as I dialed Margaret's number. Sandra and Michael thought they held all the cards, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. Margaret Hayes agreed to see me the next morning, though I could hear the concern in her voice when I called. "Ruth, you sound upset. Is everything all right?" I told her I needed to discuss some estate planning matters urgently, and she cleared her schedule for 9 a.m. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Sandra's laugh echoing in my head. The cruel amusement in her voice when she talked about my senior moments and how grateful I'd be for professional care. I kept replaying conversations from the past months, searching for signs I'd missed. How many times had Sandra exchanged knowing looks with Michael when I repeated a story? How many times had they rolled their eyes behind my back when I asked for help with my computer or wanted to show them photos from my garden club? I'd thought I was sharing my life with them. They'd seen it as evidence of my declining capabilities. The worst part was remembering how hard I'd tried to be the perfect mother-in-law. When Michael brought Sandra home 15 years ago, I'd been determined not to be one of those interfering mothers. I gave them space, respected their decisions, offered help without being pushy. I thought I'd succeeded in building a loving relationship with Sandra, but lying there in the dark, I started remembering things differently, like the time Sandra had complimented my diamond earrings, the ones Harold gave me for our 30th anniversary. "Those are gorgeous, Mom Ruth. They'd look beautiful with my wedding dress for the renewal ceremony we're planning." I'd taken them off right then and given them to her, touched that she'd want to wear something of mine for such an important occasion. But there never was a renewal ceremony. Sandra just kept the earrings. Or the time she'd admired my grandmother's china set, the one I'd been saving to pass down to future generations. "Michael's so lucky to have come from a family with such beautiful heirlooms," she'd said. "I grew up with nothing special like this." Within a week, I'd insisted she take the set for their dining room. "You'll get more use out of it than I do," I'd told her. But they used paper plates for everything and kept the china locked in a cabinet like a trophy. The pattern was there if I'd been willing to see it. Sandra would admire something, make a wistful comment about not having nice things, and I'd immediately offer it to her. She'd protest just enough to make me insist, then accept with tears of gratitude. I'd felt so good about my generosity, so pleased to be able to give my family beautiful things. Now I understood it had been calculated manipulation from the beginning. Margaret's office hadn't changed much in 5 years. The same burgundy leather chairs, the same wall of law books, the same sense of quiet competence. But Margaret looked older, grayer, and when she saw me, her professional smile shifted to genuine concern. "Ruth, you look like you haven't slept. What's happened?" I'd prepared what I was going to say, but sitting there in her office, the words came out in a rush. I told her about the phone call, about Sandra's plans, about the nursing home research and the calculations of my worth. Margaret listened without interruption, taking notes, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. When I finished, she set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "Ruth, I have to ask, are you having any cognitive issues? Memory problems, confusion, anything that might support their claims?" The question stung, but I understood why she had to ask. "No. I forget where I put my keys sometimes, but I'm 72, not 92. I remember everything clearly, including conversations from 20 years ago. My doctor did a complete physical last month and said I'm in excellent health for my age." Margaret nodded. "Good. We'll want to document that. But Ruth, what exactly do you want to do about this situation? Confronting them directly might make them accelerate their timeline. I'd thought about this all night. I don't want to confront them yet. I want to protect myself first. I want to make sure they can't touch my money or force me into a facility against my will." "Smart approach," Margaret said, pulling out a legal pad. "Let's start with your current estate setup. Who has power of attorney?" "No one. Harold and I never saw the need, and after he died, I didn't think about it." "Good. Who's the beneficiary on your accounts and insurance policies?" "Michael is the primary beneficiary on everything. I have about $200,000 in savings, another $150,000 in investments. The house is worth about $300,000, and there's a life insurance policy worth another $100,000. Margaret wrote down the numbers. "So about $750,000 total. That's substantial enough to motivate bad behavior." She looked up at me. "Ruth, I need to ask you something difficult. Do you think Michael knows about Sandra's plan?" I'd been dreading this question all night. Michael was my only child, my baby boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares. The boy who'd cried when he accidentally stepped on a bug, who'd brought me dandelions like they were roses. But that little boy had grown into a man who apparently thought his mother was a burden. "She said he was already on board," I whispered. "She said he was tired of my phone calls and visits." Margaret's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Ruth. That must be devastating." "It is, but I can't let that stop me from protecting myself." "You're absolutely right." Margaret pulled out several documents from her filing cabinet. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we'll create a comprehensive power of attorney document that requires 2 independent doctors to certify any cognitive decline before it can be activated. Second, we'll set up a revocable trust and move your assets into it, with very specific instructions about your care preferences. Third, we'll create an advance directive that explicitly states you don't want to be placed in a nursing facility unless you're physically unable to care for yourself. How long will that take? If we move quickly, we can have everything done within a week. But Ruth, there's something else you should consider. If Sandra and Michael are planning to have you declared incompetent, they might try to challenge these documents. We need to make sure you have recent medical and psychological evaluations on file to prove your mental competency. I felt a surge of anger thinking about Sandra's casual dismissal of my senior moments. "Can you recommend someone?" Dr. Patricia Williams specializes in geriatric assessments. She's testified in competency hearings and her evaluations are considered gold standard in court. I'll call her office and see if she can fit you in this week. As Margaret outlined the plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. For too long, I'd been drifting through my days, letting Sandra and Michael make decisions about family dinners, holiday plans, even what gifts to buy for the grandchildren. I'd convinced myself I was being accommodating, but really I'd been giving away my power piece by piece. "There's one more thing," Margaret said as she gathered the documents. "You mentioned they're going on this European trip that you paid for. When do they leave?" "Next Friday. They'll be gone for 2 weeks." Margaret smiled, And for the first time that morning, it wasn't sympathetic. It was strategic. Perfect. That gives us time to implement everything while they're away. By the time they come back, you'll be legally protected 6 ways from Sunday. Walking out of Margaret's office, I felt lighter than I had in months. The morning sun seemed brighter, and for the first time since Harold's death, I felt like myself again. Not the lonely widow who was grateful for any attention, not the convenient grandmother who existed to provide financial support, but Ruth Henderson, a woman who'd worked 40 years, raised a son, survived her husband's death, and wasn't about to be discarded like an old piece of furniture. Sandra and Michael thought they were so clever, planning my future without my knowledge. They had no idea that their victim was about to become their biggest problem. They wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But they were about to learn that I'd been playing games a lot longer than they had, and I was much better at winning. The next few days passed in a blur of careful acting and secret preparations. I had to maintain my normal routine with Sandra and Michael while quietly building my fortress of legal protection. It was exhausting, but also strangely exhilarating. Every smile I gave Sandra, every grateful response to her fake kindness, was now part of my own performance. Wednesday afternoon, Sandra called to finalize some last-minute details about their trip. "Mom, Ruth, you're absolutely sure about covering the travel insurance too? It's another $300, but Michael thinks we should have it just in case." "Of course, dear," I said, making my voice as warm as possible. "I want you both to have a wonderful time without any worries." "You're such an angel," Sandra gushed. "I don't know what we'd do without you." "Oh, and I was thinking, while we're gone, maybe you shouldn't be alone in that big house. Would you like me to ask my sister Karen to check on you? She could even stay over a few nights if you get lonely." My blood chilled. Karen would be Sandra's spy, reporting back on my activities, my visitors, my mail. "That's thoughtful, but I'll be fine. I have my book club, my garden club, plenty to keep me busy." "Well, if you change your mind, just call Karen directly. I'll give her your number before we leave." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like I was living in a spy movie. Sandra was already positioning people to watch me, probably hoping to gather evidence of confusion or declining capability, but two could play that game. Thursday morning, I had my appointment with Dr. Patricia Williams. Her office was in a medical building downtown, and her waiting room was filled with elderly patients and their adult children. I watched the interactions carefully. Some children seemed genuinely caring, asking questions and taking notes. Others seemed impatient, checking their phones while their parents answered the doctor's questions. Dr. Williams was a small, precise woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She spent 2 hours with me, conducting memory tests, cognitive assessments, and a thorough review of my medical history. She asked me to remember lists of words, solve math problems, draw shapes, and answer questions about current events. "Mrs. Henderson," she said when we finished, "your cognitive function is excellent for someone of any age, let alone 72. Your memory is sharp, your reasoning is clear, and your judgment appears sound. I'm going to prepare a comprehensive report documenting your mental competency. Doctor, can I ask you something? If someone wanted to have me declared incompetent, what would they need to prove?" Her expression grew serious. "They would need medical evidence of significant cognitive decline, documented instances of poor judgment that put you at risk, and testimony from people who interact with you regularly. Based on what I've seen today, anyone making such a claim would need fabricated evidence." That afternoon, I returned to Margaret's office to sign the documents she'd prepared. The power of attorney required 2 independent physicians to certify any cognitive decline. The trust protected my assets from anyone who might try to claim I was incompetent when I created it. The advance directive spelled out my care preferences in clear, unambiguous language. "Ruth," Margaret said as I signed the last page, "there's something else we should discuss. What if they try to manipulate you emotionally? Claim you're hurting Michael, or that you're being cruel to your grandchildren?" I'd been thinking about this too. Michael had 2 children, Emma, who was 16, and Jake, who was 14. They were good kids, but I rarely saw them anymore. Sandra always had excuses why they couldn't visit, why they were too busy with school and activities. "The grandchildren barely know me anymore," I said sadly. "Sandra's made sure of that. She's been isolating me from them for years. That's another pattern we see in these situations, Margaret nodded. The manipulator isolates the victim from other family members so they become the primary relationship. It makes the victim more dependent and gives the manipulator more control. Friday morning came faster than I expected. Sandra and Michael were leaving for the airport at noon, and Sandra had insisted on coming over for coffee before they left. "I want to say goodbye properly," she'd said. "And maybe you could give me that recipe for your chocolate chip cookies? I'd love to try making them while we're at the hotel." She arrived at 10, looking excited and beautiful in her new travel outfit. She'd clearly spent money getting ready for this trip. Her hair was freshly highlighted, her nails professionally done, and she was carrying a new purse that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. "Mom Ruth, you look wonderful," she said, hugging me tightly. "Are you excited for us? I can't believe we're finally taking this trip." "I'm thrilled for you both," I replied, pouring her coffee in my second-best china. I'd learned my lesson about using the good stuff around Sandra. "I brought something for you," she said, pulling a small wrapped box from her purse. "I saw this at the jewelry store and thought of you." Inside was a simple pendant necklace, the kind you'd find at a department store for $30. I'd just spent $8,000 on their vacation, and she'd brought me a trinket that cost less than what I spent on groceries each week. "It's lovely, dear. Thank you." "I thought you could wear it and think of us while we're gone," she said, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "Michael's so excited. He's been working so hard lately, and this trip is exactly what he needs. You know how stressed he gets." I did know. Michael had always been prone to anxiety, even as a child, but I also knew that most of his recent stress came from the pressure Sandra put on him to provide a lifestyle they couldn't afford on his income alone. "Where are you most excited to visit?" I asked, playing my part. "Oh, everywhere. Paris, Rome, Barcelona. We're doing a wine tour in Tuscany, and Michael booked us a cooking class in Lyon. And the hotel in Paris has a spa that looks absolutely divine." I listened to her chatter about their planned activities, mentally calculating the cost. $8,000 was just the beginning. They'd probably spend another $5,000 on meals, shopping, and activities. Money they didn't have, which meant they'd come home in debt, which meant they'd need my help even more. Which was exactly why they wanted me in a nursing home, so they could access my savings without having to ask permission or pretend gratitude. "I should get going," Sandra said finally, checking her watch. "Michael gets nervous if we're not at the airport early. But Mom Ruth, I want you to know how much this means to us. You're the most generous person I know." She hugged me again, and I smelled her expensive perfume, saw her perfect makeup, felt the softness of her cashmere sweater. Everything about her was polished and beautiful and completely fake. "Have a wonderful time," I said. "Don't worry about anything here. Just enjoy yourselves." "We will. And when we get back, maybe we can plan something special for your birthday next month." I was thinking about that lovely restaurant downtown, the one with the jazz band. My birthday. Sandra had forgotten it for the past 3 years running, only remembering when Michael reminded her days later. Now, suddenly, she was planning celebrations because she thought it might be my last birthday outside a nursing home. After she left, I stood at my kitchen window watching her drive away in the car I'd helped them buy. The house felt different now, not lonely, but peaceful. For the next 2 weeks, I wouldn't have to pretend. I wouldn't have to smile when Sandra made subtle digs about my age or my forgetfulness. I wouldn't have to listen to Michael's increasingly impatient sighs when I asked for help with technology. I was free to be myself, and more importantly, I was free to protect myself. Margaret had given me a list of tasks to complete while they were gone. First, I needed to visit my bank and remove Sandra's name from my emergency contact list. Second, I needed to change the locks on my house, something Margaret insisted on for security reasons. Third, I needed to meet with my financial advisor to move my investments into the new trust. But before I did any of that, I wanted to visit my safety deposit box. There were documents there I hadn't looked at in years, things Harold had insisted we keep secure. I had a feeling I was going to need every piece of ammunition I could find. As I gathered my purse and car keys, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked different somehow, more alert, more determined. The woman staring back at me wasn't a helpless widow waiting to be discarded. She was someone who'd spent 40 years working, saving, and planning for the future. Sandra and Michael thought they knew what that future looked like. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The first thing I did after Sandra and Michael left for the airport was drive to my bank. I'd been banking at First National for 30 years, and the manager, Robert Chen, had handled my account since Harold died. He knew me well enough to be genuinely concerned when I asked to speak with him privately. "Mrs. Henderson, is everything all right? You seem upset." I'd prepared for this conversation, knowing I needed to be careful about what I revealed. "Robert, I need to make some changes to my accounts. I want to remove my daughter-in-law as an emergency contact and beneficiary." His eyebrows raised slightly. "Of course we can do that. May I ask why? Last time we spoke, you mentioned how helpful Sandra was with your financial matters. That was the problem. I'd been too trusting, too eager to show how wonderful my relationship with Sandra was. I'd painted myself as a grateful mother-in-law blessed with a caring family. Now I needed to undo that narrative without revealing too much. I've decided I want to simplify things," I said carefully. "Keep my financial affairs more private." Robert nodded, though I could see he sensed there was more to the story. We spent an hour updating my accounts, removing Sandra's access to my emergency contacts, and setting up new security protocols. I also requested that any inquiries about my accounts be directed to me personally, with no information given to family members. "Mrs. Henderson," Robert said as we finished, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but these changes seem quite sudden. If you're having any concerns about financial abuse or manipulation, we have resources to help." The kindness in his voice almost made me break down. For months, I'd felt so alone, so unsure of my own perceptions. Having a professional validate that my concerns were legitimate was more comforting than I'd expected. "Thank you, Robert. I'm just being cautious." My next stop was the locksmith. I'd never changed the locks in all the years I'd lived in this house, but Margaret had insisted it was necessary. "If they have keys and unlimited access to your home," she'd explained, "they can stage evidence of confusion or decline, moving things around, hiding important documents, even bringing in witnesses to see you in a manufactured state of distress." The locksmith, a friendly man named Dave, arrived that afternoon. As he worked, he chatted about home security, mentioning that he'd seen an increase in elder abuse cases where family members used their access to manipulate situations. "The sad thing is," Dave said, installing the new deadbolt, "most of these seniors never see it coming. They trust their family completely, right up until the end." While Dave worked on the locks, I went through my house with new eyes. In the guest bedroom where Sandra and Michael stayed when they visited, I found things I'd forgotten about. A folder tucked under the mattress containing printouts of nursing home websites, notes in Sandra's handwriting listing my assets and their estimated values, even a business card for a lawyer who specialized in emergency guardianship proceedings. My hands shook as I read through Sandra's notes. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. She'd calculated not just my financial worth, but the monthly costs of nursing homes, the timeline for selling my house, even the tax implications of inheriting my assets. One note made my blood run cold. "Ours doctor appointment. Ask about memory concerns. Get official documentation of decline." Sandra had been planning to accompany me to my next medical appointment, armed with fabricated stories about my confusion and forgetfulness, hoping to get a doctor to document cognitive problems that didn't exist. I gathered all the papers and put them in a bag to take to Margaret. This was evidence of premeditation, proof that Sandra's plan wasn't a spontaneous idea, but a carefully orchestrated scheme. Tuesday morning, I met with my financial advisor, Janet Morrison. Like Robert at the bank, Janet had worked with Harold and me for years. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd built her practice on serving retirees and widows. "Ruth, Margaret Hayes called yesterday to discuss setting up your new trust. She mentioned you're making some significant changes to your estate planning." "That's right. I want to move all my investments into the trust and change my beneficiary designations." Janet pulled up my files on her computer. "You currently have Michael listed as primary beneficiary on everything: your IRA, your investment accounts, even your life insurance. Are you sure you want to change all of that?" "I'm sure." "Can I ask what prompted this decision? Last time we met, you were talking about ways to help Michael and Sandra with their financial goals." I'd been dreading this question, but I'd prepared an answer. "I've realized I need to think more carefully about my legacy. I want to make sure my money goes to causes I care about, not just automatically to family. Janet nodded slowly. That's actually very wise. Many people assume their children will use inherited money responsibly, but that's not always the case. We spent 2 hours restructuring everything. I kept Michael as a beneficiary, but reduced his inheritance to 25% of my estate. The rest would go to charities I'd supported for years: the local animal shelter, the literacy program at the library, the fund for low-income seniors that helped pay for medications and home care. "Ruth," Janet said as we finished, "I have to tell you, this is one of the most thoughtful estate plans I've seen. You're providing for your family while also supporting causes that clearly matter to you." If only she knew the real reason for my sudden philanthropy. But the truth was, sitting in her office, making decisions about my legacy, I felt proud of what I was doing. Sandra and Michael would still inherit a substantial amount, but they wouldn't get everything, and more importantly, they wouldn't get it automatically. The trust I'd established required them to demonstrate genuine need and responsibility before receiving any funds. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor. Karen, Sandra's sister, rang my doorbell around lunchtime. I'd been expecting this. Sandra had mentioned giving Karen my number, but seeing her on my porch still made my heart race. "Ruth! I hope you don't mind me stopping by. Sandra asked me to check on you while they're away." Karen was younger than Sandra, maybe 35, with the same blonde hair and practiced smile. She was carrying a casserole dish and wearing an expression of exaggerated concern. "That's sweet of you, but I'm doing fine. Sandra was worried you might get lonely rattling around in this big house all by yourself. Mind if I come in for a minute?" I couldn't refuse without seeming rude, so I led her to the kitchen. Karen set down the casserole and looked around with obvious curiosity, her gaze lingering on the family photos, the medicine cabinet visible through the bathroom door, the stack of mail on the counter. "Sandra says you've been having some memory issues lately," Karen said casually. "Forgetting things, getting confused about appointments. That must be scary." "I don't know what Sandra told you, but my memory is fine." Karen smiled sympathetically. "Of course it is. Sometimes family members worry more than they need to. But it's good that you have people looking out for you. Living alone at your age can be risky." Every word out of her mouth sounded like it came from a script Sandra had written. Karen was here to assess my mental state, to look for evidence of confusion or decline that Sandra could use later. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, playing the part of the gracious hostess. "That would be lovely. I was just telling Sandra how lucky Michael is to have such a caring mother. Not everyone would be so generous with that European vacation. $8,000. That's incredibly thoughtful." She was fishing, trying to get me to talk about money, maybe hoping I'd reveal confusion about my finances or make comments that could be used as evidence of poor judgment. "Family is important," I said simply. Karen stayed for an hour, asking seemingly innocent questions about my daily routine, my health, my plans for the future. She complimented my house repeatedly, mentioning how much work it must be to maintain such a large property. She even offered to help me organize my medicine cabinet, claiming she'd noticed it looked cluttered. After she left, I called Margaret immediately. "She was conducting surveillance," Margaret said without hesitation. "Everything you described, the questions about your memory, the comments about living alone being risky, the offer to organize your medications, those are classic information-gathering tactics. She was building a profile to support a competency challenge. What should I do if she comes back? Be polite, but don't volunteer information. Don't let her into your house unsupervised. And definitely don't let her handle your medications or important documents. And Ruth, document everything. Write down what she said, when she visited, what she seemed most interested in." That evening, I sat in my living room with a notebook, writing down every detail of Karen's visit. As I wrote, I realized how orchestrated it had been. The casserole was an excuse to get inside. The comments about my memory were fishing expeditions. The observations about my house being too big were setting up arguments for why I needed assisted living. Sandra and Michael thought they were so clever, using Karen as their spy while they enjoyed their European vacation on my dime. They probably thought I was sitting here alone and vulnerable, unaware of their surveillance, unprepared for their eventual attack. But I wasn't the helpless target they imagined. Every move they made was being documented. Every manipulation was being recorded. Every piece of evidence was being carefully preserved by Margaret for the legal battle that was coming. They thought they were hunting a confused old woman. Instead, they'd stumbled into a trap set by someone who'd had 72 years to learn how the world really worked. Sandra and Michael returned from Europe on a Sunday evening, 2 weeks after they'd left. I'd spent those 14 days transforming my life in ways they couldn't imagine. But when Sandra called Monday morning, I made sure to sound exactly like the lonely, grateful mother-in-law they expected to find. "Mom, Ruth, we're back. We had the most incredible time. Paris was absolutely magical, and the wine tour in Tuscany was like something out of a movie. We took so many pictures to show you." "I'm so glad you had a wonderful trip, dear. I've been looking forward to hearing all about it. We brought you some gifts, a beautiful scarf from Paris, and some olive oil from this tiny village in Italy. Can we come over this afternoon? We're dying to tell you everything." They arrived at 3 o'clock, both looking tanned and relaxed and thoroughly pleased with themselves. Sandra was practically glowing, wearing new clothes they'd obviously bought during their travels. Michael looked happier than I'd seen him in years, carrying bags full of souvenirs and talking animatedly about the restaurants they'd visited. "Mom, this trip was exactly what we needed," Michael said, hugging me. "We feel like ourselves again. Thank you so much for making it possible." For a moment, watching my son's genuine happiness, I almost wavered. He looked so much like the little boy I'd raised, excited and grateful and full of life. But then I remembered Sandra's voice on that phone call, the cruel laughter when she talked about throwing me in a nursing home, and my resolve hardened. "I'm just happy you both enjoyed it," I said, accepting the gifts they'd brought. The scarf was lovely, probably expensive, and the olive oil came in a beautiful hand-painted bottle. For a brief moment, I wondered if I'd misunderstood everything, if maybe Sandra really did care about me. Then she started talking. "You know, Mom, Ruth, Michael and I did a lot of thinking on this trip, about family, about the future, about what's best for everyone." Sandra settled onto my couch with the confident air of someone about to deliver good news. "We realize you must get lonely in this big house all by yourself. Here it comes," I thought. "And we know how hard it must be to keep up with everything. The maintenance, the yard work, all the little things that houses need. So we've been researching some options that might be perfect for you." Michael jumped in, his voice taking on that careful tone people use when they're trying to convince someone to do something they don't want to do. "Mom, there are some really nice senior communities around here. Places where you'd have your own space but also access to activities, social opportunities, even medical care if you need it." "We visited some websites while we were in the hotel," Sandra added. "The pictures looked beautiful, like cruise ships on land, organized activities, group meals, even transportation for shopping and appointments." I sat quietly, letting them build their case, watching the performance I'd been expecting for 2 weeks. They were so confident, so sure that their European vacation had given them the moral authority to reorganize my life. "The best part is, you wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore," Sandra continued. "No more struggling with house maintenance or wondering if you're safe living alone. Professional staff would be available 24 hours a day. It's really the responsible thing to do," Michael added. "Dad would want to know you're being taken care of properly." Bringing Harold into it was a low blow, but I kept my expression neutral. "These places sound expensive." Sandra and Michael exchanged a quick glance, the first crack in their performance. "Well, yes, they do cost money," Sandra admitted. "But Mom, you've got this big house just sitting here, and you don't really need all this space anymore. The equity could easily cover years of care in a really nice facility. Plus," Michael added, "you've always said you wanted to make sure your money was used wisely. This would be an investment in your own well-being." I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering their proposal. "You've obviously put a lot of thought into this." "We have," Sandra said, relief evident in her voice. "We love you so much, and we just want what's best for you. We've even made some preliminary inquiries. Nothing binding, of course, just to get an idea of availability and costs." "How thoughtful. And when were you thinking this might happen?" "Well," Michael said, shifting uncomfortably, "sooner is probably better than later." These places often have waiting lists, and at your age, it's better to make the transition while you're still healthy and can adapt easily. At my age, as if 72 was ancient, as if I was already 1 foot in the grave. I see. And you've already looked into specific facilities? Sandra pulled out her phone with barely contained excitement. Actually, yes. There's one called Sunny Meadows that looks perfect. It's only 20 minutes from our house, so we could visit all the time. They have a lovely garden, a library, even a beauty salon. She showed me pictures on her phone, generic stock photos of smiling elderly people in a sterile institutional setting, the kind of place where people went to wait to die. It looks very nice, I said calmly. What did you find out about costs? About $4,000 a month for a basic apartment, Michael said. More if you need additional services. But the house should easily cover several years. $4,000 a month, $48,000 a year. In 5 years, they'd have burned through nearly $250,000 of my money, and I'd be trapped in an institution I never chose. That does seem reasonable, I said, and watched their faces light up with triumph. So you'll consider it? Sandra asked eagerly. Oh, I've done more than consider it. I've made my decision. The shift in the room was immediate. Both Sandra and Michael leaned forward, anticipating my surrender. I've decided that anyone who would plan to throw their mother into a nursing home while she's paying for their European vacation is someone who doesn't deserve to inherit a single dollar from me. The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra's mouth fell open. Michael blinked rapidly, as if he couldn't process what he'd heard. Mom, what are you talking about? Michael asked weakly. I reached into the side table drawer and pulled out a folder containing printouts of the documents I'd found in their guest room, along with a transcript of the phone conversation I'd overheard. I'd had Margaret's office prepare everything neatly, professionally, like evidence in a court case. I'm talking about this, I said, sliding the folder across the coffee table. Your wife's research into nursing homes, her calculations of my net worth, her timeline for getting me declared incompetent. I'm talking about the phone conversation where she laughed about throwing me in a nursing home after I paid for your trip. Sandra's face went white, then red, then white again. You were eavesdropping on my private conversations? You forgot to hang up the phone, I said calmly. And it wasn't private when you were discussing my life and my money. Michael grabbed the folder and started reading, his face growing paler with each page. Sandra, what is this? These notes about Mom's assets, about guardianship proceedings. Did you really write all this? I was just researching options, Sandra said desperately, making sure we were prepared in case Mom needed help. This isn't what it looks like. Really? I asked, because it looks like you've been planning to steal my life savings and warehouse me in an institution while pretending it's for my own good. That's not. We would never. Sandra was stammering now, her careful composure completely shattered. You said, and I quote, after she pays for my trip, I'll throw her in a nursing home. You laughed about how gullible I am. You called me the old woman and talked about how tired you were of pretending to care about my stories. Michael looked like he might be sick. Mom, if Sandra said those things, I had no idea. Actually, you did, I interrupted, pulling out another sheet of paper. According to these notes, you were already on board with the nursing home plan. You were tired of her calling every day and thought it was time I had professional supervision. The betrayal on Michael's face as he realized I knew about his involvement was almost painful to watch. Almost. Mom, I never said those exact words. Maybe not those exact words, but you agreed to the plan. You participated in it. You were willing to let your wife manipulate me into signing over my independence so you could live comfortably on my money. Sandra suddenly found her voice again, and her tone shifted from defensive to aggressive. You know what? Fine. Maybe I did say those things, but it's true, Ruth. You are getting older. You do forget things. You do need more help than you used to. We were trying to plan for the inevitable. The inevitable, I repeated. You mean the inevitable moment when you could steal my money legally? It's not stealing if it's family money, Sandra snapped, finally showing her true colors. Michael is your only child. That money should be ours anyway. We're just trying to make sure it's managed responsibly. Responsibly? Like the way you've managed your own finances? Constantly asking for loans? Living beyond your means? Relying on me to bail you out whenever you make poor decisions? Michael was staring at Sandra like he'd never seen her before. Sandra, how could you say it's family money? It's Mom's money. She worked for it. She saved it. She gets to decide what to do with it. Oh, please. Sandra laughed bitterly. Don't act like you haven't been thinking the same thing. How many times have you complained about having to visit her, having to listen to her repeat the same stories, having to help her with things she should be able to handle herself? That's different from planning to institutionalize her against her will, is it? Because you seemed pretty interested when I mentioned how much easier our lives would be if she was somewhere safe with professional care. I watched this fight unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. My son and daughter-in-law were tearing each other apart, revealing the ugly truth beneath their marriage, and I was the cause of it. But I was also the victim of it. Enough, I said finally. Both of them turned to look at me, remembering I was still in the room. I think you've both said more than enough, Mom, Michael started. But I held up my hand. I want you both to leave. Now. And I want you to understand something very clearly. You will never get another penny from me. You will never have access to my accounts, my house, or my decisions about my own life. If you try to have me declared incompetent, you'll find that I've taken steps to protect myself legally. And if you try to contest my will, you'll discover that most of my money is going to charity anyway. Sandra's face contorted with rage. You can't do this to us. We have children to think about, a mortgage to pay. You can't just cut us off. Watch me, I said, standing up and walking to the front door. Your financial problems are not my responsibility. Your poor decisions are not my fault. And your greed is not my problem to solve. Mom, please, Michael said, his voice breaking. Can't we talk about this? Can't we work something out? For a moment, hearing the pain in my son's voice, I almost wavered, but then I remembered Sandra's cruel laughter, the casual way she'd discussed discarding me, the years of manipulation and emotional abuse disguised as love. The time for talking was before you decided to treat me like a bank account with an inconvenient old woman attached to it, I said. Now, I think it's time for you both to learn what life looks like when you have to take care of yourselves. They left without another word, Sandra stomping to their car while Michael looked back at me with an expression of loss and regret that might have been genuine. But it was too late for regret, far too late. As I watched them drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete and utter peace. The confrontation I'd been dreading was over, and I'd survived it. More than survived. I'd won. 6 months had passed since that confrontation in my living room, and my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The house felt different now. Not empty, but peaceful. The silence that had once felt oppressive now felt like freedom. I could wake up when I wanted, eat what I pleased, watch my television shows without anyone sighing impatiently or checking their phones. The legal protections Margaret had put in place proved to be exactly what I needed. 2 weeks after Sandra and Michael left that day, they'd attempted to challenge my competency through an attorney they'd hired. But Dr. Williams' comprehensive evaluation, combined with the documented evidence of their manipulation, made their case impossible to pursue. Their lawyer had actually advised them to drop the matter entirely to avoid potential charges of attempted elder abuse. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd struggled financially without my support. Michael had been forced to take a second job, and Sandra had gone back to work full-time for the first time in years. Their European vacation, it turned out, had been charged to credit cards they couldn't afford to pay off. Without my safety net, they'd been forced to face the reality of their spending habits. Part of me felt sorry for them, especially for Michael, but a larger part of me recognized that learning to stand on their own feet was the best thing that could happen to them. For too long, I'd enabled their irresponsibility by always being there to solve their problems. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the window, I saw a young woman I didn't recognize standing on my porch with a teenage girl beside her. As I opened the door, the girl broke into a huge smile. "Grandma Ruth!" It was Emma, my 16-year-old granddaughter, though she looked older than when I'd last seen her 8 months ago. She was taller, her face more mature, but her eyes still held the warmth I remembered from when she was little. "Emma!" I hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling how much she'd grown. "What are you doing here?" "This is my friend's mom, Mrs. Patterson," Emma said, gesturing to the woman beside her. "She drove me over because I really wanted to see you." Mrs. Patterson smiled warmly. "Emma's been talking about you constantly. She asked if I could bring her by for a visit. I hope that's okay. Of course it's okay. Please, come in. As we settled in the living room, Emma looked around with obvious curiosity. The house looks different, Grandma. Brighter somehow. She was right. I'd redecorated in the months since the confrontation, choosing colors that made me happy instead of the neutral tones Sandra had always preferred. I'd hung new artwork, rearranged furniture to suit my needs, and turned Harold's old office into a craft room where I could pursue the hobbies I'd abandoned years ago. I've made some changes, I said. How are you, sweetheart? How's school? Good. Really good, actually. I made varsity soccer, and I'm taking AP Art History, which I love. Emma paused, then looked down at her hands. Grandma, I need to tell you something. I know what happened with Mom and Dad. My heart sank. Emma, you don't need to worry about adult problems. No, I want to talk about it, she interrupted, looking up at me with Harold's determined expression. Mom told me and Jake that you cut them off because you were being selfish and vindictive. But Dad told me what really happened, about Mom's plan to put you in a nursing home, about the things she said about you. Mrs. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. Emma, maybe this isn't. It's okay, I told her, then turned back to Emma. What did your father tell you? He told me about the phone call you overheard, about the research Mom did, about how they were planning to use your money and then put you away. He cried when he told me, Grandma. I've never seen my dad cry before. My throat tightened. Despite everything, knowing that Michael felt genuine remorse provided some comfort. He said he went along with it because Mom convinced him it was for your own good, but that he realized afterward how wrong it was. He's been trying to figure out how to apologize to you, but he doesn't think you'll ever forgive him. And what do you think about all of this? I asked carefully. Emma was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I think what Mom planned was horrible, and I think Dad should have stood up to her instead of going along with it. But I also think maybe you both made mistakes. What kind of mistakes do you think I made? I think you made it too easy for them to take advantage of you. Mom's always been kind of manipulative, even with me and Jake. She has ways of making you feel guilty if you don't do what she wants, but you kept giving her what she wanted, so she kept pushing for more. The wisdom in my 16-year-old granddaughter's words was startling. She'd identified the exact dynamic that had enabled Sandra's behavior for so many years. You're very perceptive, I said. I get that from you, Emma smiled. Mom always said I was too much like my grandmother for my own good. I think she meant it as an insult, but I took it as a compliment. Mrs. Patterson spoke up gently. Emma's been having a hard time at home since all this happened. Her parents are, well, they're struggling, fighting a lot, blaming each other. She asked if she could spend some time with you, if you're open to that. I would love that, I said immediately. But Emma, what about your parents? Won't they object? Dad said I could make my own decisions about whether to see you. Mom. Well, Mom said a lot of things I'm not going to repeat. But I'm 16, Grandma. I'm old enough to choose who I want in my life. We spent the afternoon talking, really talking, in a way Emma and I hadn't in years. She told me about school, her friends, her plans for college. I told her about the art classes I'd started taking, the book club I'd joined, the volunteer work I'd begun at the animal shelter. You seem different, Grandma, Emma observed. Stronger, I guess. More like yourself. I feel more like myself, I admitted. For a long time, I was so focused on being the perfect mother and grandmother that I forgot to be Ruth. I like Ruth, Emma said firmly. I like her a lot. As Mrs. Patterson prepared to drive Emma home, my granddaughter hugged me tightly. Can I come visit again next weekend? Maybe I could even spend the night sometimes. I would love that. But Emma, I want you to understand something. I will always love your father, and I hope someday we can rebuild our relationship. But I will never go back to the way things were before. I will never again allow anyone to treat me like a bank account or a burden. I wouldn't want you to, Emma said. You deserve better than that. After they left, I sat in my garden as the sun set, reflecting on the unexpected gift of my granddaughter's visit. Sandra had tried to isolate me from the children, to control my relationships with them just as she'd controlled everything else. But Emma was old enough to see through the manipulation, strong enough to make her own choices about who she wanted in her life. The phone rang, and I saw Margaret's name on the caller ID. "Ruth, I have some news you might find interesting," she said. "I heard through professional channels that Sandra and Michael are getting divorced." I wasn't entirely surprised. The stress of their financial problems, combined with the breakdown of trust between them, had probably made their marriage unsustainable. "How do you feel about that?" Margaret asked. "Sad for them," I said honestly, "especially for the children, but not guilty. Their problems are consequences of their own choices." That's a very healthy perspective. And Ruth, there's something else. Michael's attorney reached out to me. He wants to know if you'd be willing to meet with Michael privately. He apparently wants to apologize and see if there's any possibility of rebuilding your relationship. I considered this. 6 months ago, I would have said yes immediately, desperate for any chance to reconcile with my son. But I'd learned a lot about myself in those months, about the difference between love and enabling, between forgiveness and being a doormat. Tell his attorney that I'm open to meeting with Michael, but only under certain conditions. First, Sandra cannot be involved in any way. Second, any relationship we rebuild will be based on mutual respect, not financial dependency. And third, he needs to understand that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. "I'll relay that message," Margaret said. "Ruth, I have to tell you, you've become one of my favorite clients. The way you've handled this situation, the strength you've shown, it's inspiring." After hanging up, I walked through my house, turning on lamps as darkness fell. Every room reflected my choices now, my preferences, my personality. The guest room that had once housed evidence of Sandra's betrayal was now a comfortable space where Emma could stay whenever she wanted. Harold's office had become my craft room, filled with art supplies and half-finished projects that brought me joy. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, lonely, desperate for approval, willing to sacrifice my own well-being to maintain relationships that were ultimately one-sided. That woman had been so afraid of being alone that she'd allowed herself to be used and manipulated. But being alone, I'd discovered, wasn't the same as being lonely. I had friends now, real friends from my art class and book club who valued my company for who I was, not what I could provide. I had activities that fulfilled me, hobbies that challenged me, volunteer work that gave me purpose. Most importantly, I had myself back. The Ruth who'd worked 40 years and built a life with Harold. The Ruth who'd raised a son and survived widowhood. The Ruth who was strong enough to stand up for herself when it mattered most. My phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. "Thank you for today, Grandma. I love you. Can't wait to see you next weekend." I smiled, typing back, "I love you too, sweetheart. I'll make your favorite cookies." As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had gray hair and wrinkles, but her eyes were bright with confidence and peace. She looked like someone who knew her own worth, someone who would never again allow others to define her value. Sandra had been wrong about so many things, but she'd been right about one. I had changed. I was stronger. I was more myself than I'd been in years. And I was finally, completely free. The plastic pendant necklace Sandra had given me before their trip still sat in my jewelry box, a reminder of how little she'd valued me. But next to it now sat a beautiful silver locket Emma had bought me with her own babysitting money, engraved with the words, "World's Best Grandma." Some people, I'd learned, were worth the investment of love. Others were worth the investment of boundaries. The wisdom was in knowing the difference. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete contentment. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new adventures, new opportunities to live life on my own terms. At 72, I was finally just getting started.